Hook. What if the reason your life feels completely confusing right now is because you're judging a chapter before you've seen the ending? The rejection, the delay, the loss, the uncertainty, you may be seeing them as proof that you're falling behind. But what if they're quietly moving you somewhere you couldn't see coming? Key. There is a particular kind of frustration that comes when they've done your best and life still refuses to make sense. You tried to make the relationship work, you worked for the opportunity, you stayed patient, you made plans, and somehow things still didn't turn out the way you expected. That's when the mind starts searching for answers. You replay the past, question yourself, compare your life to everyone else's, and wonder whether you're somehow missing something. Pungy. But Stoic philosophy offers a different way to look at uncertainty. Instead of demanding that life explain itself immediately, you learn to control what belongs to you and release what doesn't. And the season that looks like the biggest setback from the inside becomes a turning point when you finally look back. Sometimes the most confusing season of your life is not proof that you are lost. It may be the moment when the life you knew is finally making room for the life you are supposed to build. And that is what makes these seasons so difficult. You cannot see the destination, but you can feel that something is changing. The old version of you no longer fits, yet the new version has not fully arrived. Maybe you are there right now. You work hard, but the results are slow. You thought a relationship would last, and it didn't. You made plans, but life interrupted them. You watched other people move forward, while you seemed to be standing still. And eventually a dangerous thought begins to whisper in your mind. Maybe something is wrong with me. Bede, but what if nothing is wrong with you? What if you are simply standing in the uncomfortable space between what was and what comes next? There are moments when life refuses to give you an explanation. You can do everything you believe is right and still experience disappointment. You can be loyal and still be betrayed. You can be prepared and still fail. You can give someone your best and still watch them walk away. You can spend months building something only to discover that it was never meant to stay. The human mind hates uncertainty. When we don't understand what is happening, we try to create a story. We replay conversations, we analyze every mistake, we imagine different outcomes, we ask what we should have done differently. We search for a reason because a painful explanation can sometimes feel safer than uncertainty. But uncertainty is not always an enemy. Sometimes uncertainty is simply reality, asking you to stop demanding answers before their time. Think about a seed buried underground. From the surface, nothing seems to be happening. There is no flower, no visible growth, no evidence that anything is changing. If you judge the seed only by what you could see, you would call it inactive. But beneath the surface, something completely different is taking place. Your life can have seasons like that. There may be a period when your progress is invisible. You are becoming more disciplined, more selective, more emotionally stable, more aware of what you actually want. None of those changes necessarily produce immediate applause. Nobody congratulates you for becoming harder to manipulate. Nobody sees the private decision to stop chasing someone who keeps disappointing you. Nobody knows how much strength it took to remain silent instead of reacting. Yet those invisible changes can completely alter the direction of your life. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes incredibly practical. Epictetus emphasized the distinction between what belongs to our control and what does not. You cannot control when everything will make sense. You cannot control another person's decision. You cannot force an opportunity to arrive. You cannot command life to follow your preferred timeline. Trades. But you can control what you do with this moment. You can control whether disappointment turns into bitterness or wisdom. You can control whether rejection becomes an attack on your identity or information about where you should go next. You can control whether uncertainty makes you panic or teaches you patience. That distinction changes everything. Imagine someone who has been waiting months for a career opportunity. They applied, prepared, followed up, and still received no answer. Every morning they check their phone, hoping for an email. Every evening they wonder whether they are falling behind. Now imagine that 6 months later, they receive an opportunity somewhere completely different, one they would never have considered if the first door had opened. Would the previous rejection suddenly look different? Oh, probably. No. And this is why we have to be careful about judging our lives too early. You may be calling something a failure simply because you haven't seen what it prevented. You may be calling a delay a punishment when it is actually protection. You may believe a door closed because you were not good enough when perhaps that door simply wasn't leading where you thought it was. This doesn't mean every painful event secretly has a perfect reason. Life is not a machine designed to satisfy our expectations. Bad things happen. People make unfair choices. Some losses never receive satisfying explanations. Stoicism does not require you to pretend that pain is good. It teaches you to stop allowing pain to decide who you become. Marcus Aurelius faced uncertainty, political pressure, conflict, loss, and responsibilities far beyond what most people experience. His philosophy repeatedly returned to a simple idea: meet reality as it is, then decide how you will conduct yourself within it. Cleaned. That is a powerful way to live, because sometimes the real problem is not that life makes no sense. The real problem is that we are demanding certainty from a situation that can only give us patience. You may be waiting for the perfect relationship, the perfect career, financial stability, recognition, or some sign that tells you everything is going to be okay. But while you wait for certainty, your actual life is happening. This moment matters. The person you are becoming during the waiting matters. The habits you build while nobody is watching matter. The boundaries you establish after being disappointed matter. The ability to remain calm when you don't know what happens next matters. There is a strange psychological shift that happens when you stop asking, when will everything finally work out? And start asking, who do I want to become while I don't know? The first question places your peace in the future. The second returns it to you. That is emotional freedom. Maybe you lost someone you thought you needed. At first, everything feels empty. You look at your phone and instinctively expect their name. You remember the good moments. You wonder whether you should reach out. You imagine what might have happened if you had said something differently. But slowly, you begin to discover something uncomfortable and liberating. You were not only grieving the person, you were grieving the future you imagined with them. And sometimes healing begins when you stop trying to resurrect a future that no longer exists. The same thing happens with failure. You thought you would be somewhere else by this age. You imagined the house, the career, the relationship, the success. Then reality gave you something different. Suddenly, comparison becomes painful. Someone younger seems more successful. Someone you started with is now far ahead. But your life is not a race against another person's timeline. Seneca wrote extensively about how easily human beings waste life by allowing their attention to be consumed by things outside their control. That idea is remarkable. We can spend hours watching other people's achievements online, comparing their visible results with our invisible struggles. You see their finished chapter and compare it with your unfinished sentence. Of course, you feel behind lines, but you don't know what their life actually costs them, and they don't know what yours requires from you. Bonjour. So perhaps this season is asking you to become less obsessed with visible progress and more committed to meaningful progress. Wake up and do the work you can do. Have the conversation you need to have. Walk away from what repeatedly destroys your peace. Take responsibility for your mistakes without turning them into an identity. Let people misunderstand you when explaining yourself would only create another argument. Accept that some answers arrive only after you have lived long enough to understand the question. And most importantly, stop interpreting every delay as evidence that you are failing. Sometimes you are being redirected. Sometimes you are being strengthened. Sometimes you are simply being asked to continue without applause. Done. That is difficult because modern life trains us to expect immediate feedback. We post something and want reactions. We work and want results. We make a decision and want confirmation. We take one step and want proof that we chose correctly. But growth rarely works that way. A mountain does not become smaller because you are impatient. You simply become stronger by continuing to climb. And one day, you may look backward at the season that confused you most and realize it was quietly preparing you for everything that came afterward. Down. The rejection taught you discernment. The loneliness taught you independence. The failure taught you humility. The betrayal taught you boundaries. The uncertainty taught you patience. The waiting taught you how to move without guarantees. Suddenly, the period you desperately wanted to escape becomes the period you understand most clearly. That is why you should not be so quick to demand an explanation from life. Instead, ask yourself a better question. What is this moment training me to become? Maybe the answer is patience. And maybe it is courage. Maybe it is emotional control. Maybe it is the ability to stand alone without feeling abandoned. Maybe it is learning that your worth does not rise and fall according to who chooses you. Whatever the answer is, don't waste this season waiting for another one to begin. Live this one. There will be days when you still feel confused. There will be mornings when you wonder whether you are making progress at all. That is okay. You do not need to feel certain every day to keep moving in the right direction. Stoic life is not a life without uncertainty. It is a life where uncertainty no longer controls your character. So if nothing makes sense right now, breathe, do what is yours to do, release what isn't. Stop forcing answers. Stop chasing people who have already shown you where they stand. Stop measuring your worth by temporary circumstances. And stop assuming that because you cannot see the next chapter, there is no next chapter. You may be much closer than you think. Truths, not necessarily to the exact outcome you imagined, but to something deeper, a version of yourself that no longer needs everything to go according to plan in order to remain at peace. And when you become that person, life changes, not because the world suddenly becomes predictable, but because you become capable of meeting whatever comes next. If this message spoke to something you are going through, take a moment to let it sink in. And if you want more lessons on emotional strength, discipline, self-mastery, and Stoic wisdom, like this video and subscribe to Daily Stoic Dose. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep building a mind that does not collapse simply because life becomes uncertain. One day, you may understand why this season had to happen exactly the way it did. But until that day comes, you don't need every answer. You only need enough courage to take the next right step, Jendi. Because sometimes the moment when nothing makes sense is the moment you are finally being prepared to understand yourself.